Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. It was almost midnight when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I'd almost ignored it, thinking it was another random notification, but something made me glance at the screen. The name glowing softly in the dark made my heart stop. Daniel. My ex-husband's closest friend. We hadn't spoken in years, not since the divorce. For a moment, I just stared at the name, my thumb hovering over the screen, my mind already racing through memories I had long packed away. I hesitated. It wasn't anger or curiosity that made my chest tighten. It was confusion. Why now? After all this time? The house was quiet, the clock ticking faintly in the hallway, and the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I finally opened the message. "Hi, I know it's late. I wouldn't have reached out if it wasn't important." Those words hit differently. Daniel was never dramatic. He was steady, the kind of person who spoke carefully and meant every word. Back then, he had been the quiet anchor between my ex and me, often the voice of reason when things got messy. And now, years later, that same calm presence felt like a ghost from another life, suddenly knocking at my door. I typed and erased several replies before settling on, "I'm awake. Is everything okay?" Then I sat there, staring at the blinking dots that showed he was typing. My mind drifted to the last time I'd seen him, that cold morning when he helped my ex pack his car after the separation. He didn't say much then, just gave me a look that said more than any words could. I'd never forgotten it. His reply came after a minute. "Can I call you?" I hesitated again. I could almost hear his voice already, calm, a little worn around the edges, like someone who had seen too much and carried it quietly. I took a deep breath and pressed accept. "Hey," he said softly when I answered. Just that single word carried years of distance, regret, and something I couldn't quite name. "I hope I didn't wake you." "No, I couldn't sleep anyway," I replied, my voice quieter than I intended. There was a pause. I could hear faint traffic in the background on his end, maybe from the city. "I didn't know how to start this," he admitted. "I've been meaning to reach out for a long time, but I didn't think I had the right." The right. That word stayed in my chest like a weight. After everything that happened, who really had the right to revisit the past? But something in his tone made me soften. "You can tell me, Daniel," I said, "whatever it is." He exhaled slowly, and for a few seconds, the silence between us felt almost sacred, like we were both standing at the edge of something fragile and real. "I was with him," he said finally. "That last night before he left." I froze. My ex-husband had left abruptly years ago, cutting ties with nearly everyone. I never got closure, just a long stretch of unanswered questions that slowly faded into acceptance. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. He said some things I think you deserve to hear. Things he should have told you himself. My breath caught. "Why now?" "Because I saw you last month," he said. "You were at the farmer's market. You looked happy, but also like you still had something left unsaid, and I realized I can't carry this alone anymore." I didn't know whether to be angry or grateful. The idea that someone had been holding a missing piece of my story all these years, it was overwhelming. "You should have told me earlier," I whispered. "I know," he said, his voice low, "but I thought I was protecting you." That sentence lingered in the quiet. I felt the years compress between us, the missed chances, the unspoken truths, the weight of memories that never faded completely. And beneath it all, a strange sense of comfort. Not because he had answers, but because after so long, someone finally remembered that I still needed them. We talked for a few minutes more, circling around the edges of what he wanted to say. I could tell he was building up to something deeper, something that had been sitting heavy on his chest for years. I didn't rush him. I just listened. Really listened, for the first time in a long while. When the call ended, I sat there in the dark, the screen fading to black, my reflection faint against it. I didn't know what truth Daniel was carrying, but I knew one thing. My silence, the one I had kept all these years, had finally been broken. And deep down, I sensed that whatever he would tell me next might change how I saw everything that came before. The next evening came with an unexpected calm. The air outside had that early autumn crispness, and the soft hum of the streetlights slipped through my curtains. I made myself a cup of tea, though my hands shook slightly as I poured. I hadn't been able to stop thinking about Daniel's words from the night before. His tone had stayed with me, sincere, steady, carrying something more than guilt. I knew he would call again, and part of me wanted him to. Sure enough, around 9, my phone lit up. This time I didn't hesitate. I picked up before the second ring. "Thank you for answering," he said softly. "I've been expecting you," I replied, sitting down by the window. The world outside looked muted, distant, like a painting where everything had gone still. He let out a breath. I wasn't sure if I should say anything more, but I owe it to both of you. His words settled over me like mist. I stayed quiet, letting him take his time. "I was there," he continued, "the night before he left. He was drinking. Not much, just enough to loosen the truth out of him. He told me he wasn't leaving because of you." My breath hitched. "Then why?" "Because of himself," Daniel said. "He was lost. He couldn't live with what he'd become. He thought by leaving, he was giving you a chance to be happy." I closed my eyes, the tea cooling in my hands. It was strange. I had imagined 100 reasons over the years. Betrayal, indifference, exhaustion. But not this. Not something that almost sounded like love twisted into sacrifice. "He wanted me to tell you one day," Daniel continued, his voice trembling now. "He said if she ever asks about me, tell her I didn't stop caring. I just couldn't be the man she deserved." The words hit like a tide, washing over me with quiet force. My heart ached, not in anger but in recognition, of how love sometimes collapses under the weight of its own good intentions. For a long while, neither of us spoke. I could hear Daniel breathing, steady but heavy, like he was afraid I'd hang up. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked finally. My voice was barely above a whisper. "I tried once," he said. "I came by your house a few months after he left. But you looked peaceful, or at least trying to be. I thought opening old wounds would only make things worse." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "Peace," I said softly. "That's a funny word. I think I just learned how to pretend." He didn't answer right away. Then gently, "You don't have to pretend now." Something shifted in the silence between us. Not romance, not longing, but something deeper. Understanding. Two people who had watched the same story unfold from different corners, finally standing in the same light. "I kept wondering if he ever regretted it," I said. "He did," Daniel replied. "Every single day. He wasn't good at saying it, but he carried that regret like a shadow. I saw it." My eyes filled, and I pressed the heel of my palm against them, trying not to let my voice crack. "Why are you telling me all this now, Daniel?" "Because," he said, "I saw how you've kept living. I wanted you to know it wasn't your fault. You didn't fail him. He failed himself." For a while, we just listened to each other breathe. The quiet wasn't heavy this time. It was tender, like a long sigh after years of holding your breath. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for not speaking up, for letting you believe the worst." "I'm not angry," I said, surprising myself. "Just relieved. Maybe I needed to hear it from someone who was there." The night deepened, and I noticed how the moonlight had spilled across the floor, painting everything in soft silver. I felt lighter, though nothing had truly changed. Maybe it wasn't closure I was seeking all these years. Maybe it was simply truth. Before we hung up, Daniel said something I didn't expect. He always admired your strength. He said you were the only person who ever saw him completely. My voice caught in my throat. Then why did he leave someone who saw him? Daniel paused, then said quietly, because sometimes being seen is the hardest thing of all. When the call ended, I didn't cry. I just sat there, the moonlight steady on my face, realizing that the silence between my past and present had finally begun to break apart, piece by fragile piece. The following days passed quietly, though my mind wasn't still for a single moment. Everything Daniel had said replayed in my head like an echo that refused to fade. It wasn't the kind of revelation that brought easy peace. It was one that stirred the soul, gently but deeply, forcing me to look at the past through a new lens. I began to remember moments differently. The small hesitations in my ex's smile, the way he would stand by the window long after midnight, lost in thought, or the quiet apologies he never voiced but showed through gestures, fixing the broken shelf, refilling my teacup, leaving notes that said, "Don't wait up." Back then, I thought those were signs of distance. Now they looked like silent farewells. Daniel didn't call for a few days, but his absence didn't feel strange. It was as though we both needed space to breathe, to absorb what had been said. But on the fourth evening, my phone buzzed again. His message was simple. "I'd like to tell you the rest, if you're ready." I stared at it for a while, then typed back, "Come by tomorrow. I think I'd rather hear it face to face." The next day, I cleaned my living room, not because I was expecting anything formal, but because I wanted the space to feel warm. I lit a small candle, one that smelled faintly of cedar and vanilla, and opened the window just enough to let the autumn breeze in. When the knock came, my heart fluttered like it hadn't in years. Daniel looked older than I remembered, not in a tired way, but in a human way. Life had drawn its quiet lines across his face, and his eyes carried that same steadiness I once found comforting. When he stepped inside, he smiled softly. "It's been a long time," he said. "It has," I replied, motioning for him to sit. "Tea?" He nodded, and for a few minutes, the clink of porcelain filled the space between us. It felt natural, familiar, as though we'd both been waiting for this calm. "I wasn't sure how this would feel," I admitted, "having you here again." "Neither did I," he said with a quiet laugh, "but it feels right." When we finally sat down, the conversation moved slowly, like turning the pages of an old letter. "He wanted me to tell you something else," Daniel began, his gaze dropping to his hands. "Something about the day he left. You see, he didn't go alone." I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "He went to a clinic. It wasn't another woman or another life. It was treatment. He had been diagnosed with something serious, and he didn't want you to watch him fade. He told me he wanted you to remember him strong." For a moment, the world stopped. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, feel the pulse of disbelief tightening my chest. I tried to speak, but no sound came. Daniel continued, his voice low. "He made me promise not to tell you. Said it would only hurt you more. He thought he could beat it quietly, then come back. But he didn't." I felt my throat close, my fingers trembling around the edge of the teacup. "So all this time, he was trying to protect you," Daniel said, "in his own way. It wasn't right, maybe not even kind, but it came from love." The tears came silently. They weren't loud or messy, just gentle, like the release of something too heavy to hold any longer. I had spent years believing I'd been abandoned, left behind without reason. Now, that weight began to lift, though not without pain. "I wish he'd told me," I whispered. "He wished that too," Daniel said. "But he didn't want you to see him weak. He said you tried to fix him, and he couldn't bear that. I let out a long breath, somewhere between a sigh and a sob. "That sounds like him," I said softly. "Always carrying the world alone." Daniel nodded. He asked me to stay in touch with you after he was gone, but I couldn't bring myself to. Every time I thought of calling, I saw your face that day, the strength, the sadness, and I froze. There was no anger left in me, just a quiet understanding that sometimes love is expressed in the most painful ways imaginable. We sat there in silence, two people bound not by romance, but by shared memory and a man who had connected our lives in ways we hadn't understood until now. When Daniel finally looked up, his eyes were glassy but calm. He wasn't perfect, but he loved you. I think you were the one good thing he believed he ever did right. I smiled faintly through the tears. "Then maybe that's enough," I said. He nodded, and for the first time in years, I felt the heaviness in my chest begin to ease. The truth had hurt, but it also healed, and as the candle flickered gently between us, I realized that sometimes the stories we think are over still have one more chapter left to tell. That night, after Daniel left, I sat by the window for a long time, watching the quiet world outside. The leaves rustled softly under the streetlights, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once before silence took over again. The truth Daniel had shared was still settling inside me, heavy but strangely peaceful. It wasn't the ending I'd once imagined, yet it was the one that finally made sense. I thought back to those years I spent wondering what I had done wrong, questioning every word, every silence, every goodbye that didn't feel complete. And now, knowing that he hadn't left because of anger or boredom, but out of love and fear, changed something deep within me. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave it meaning. The next morning, Daniel called again, his voice softer than before. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay," he said. "I think I am," I replied, though the words came with a small tremor. "It feels like I've been holding my breath for years, and now I can finally exhale." He was quiet for a moment. He'd be glad to know that. I smiled faintly. "And you? How have you carried all of this alone?" He sighed. "Not well. I thought keeping the promise would bring peace, but it only brought silence. I should have told you sooner." "I understand it," I said. "You were trying to protect him even after he was gone." The line went quiet, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was warm, shared, human, honest. A few days later, Daniel stopped by again. He brought a small envelope, sealed and worn at the corners. "He left this with me," he said, placing it gently on the table. "He said I should give it to you if the time ever felt right." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a short letter, written in his familiar handwriting, steady, thoughtful, and full of pauses between words, as if he'd chosen each one carefully. "If you're reading this, it means I wasn't strong enough to stay, but I was brave enough to let go. You were my peace, even when I couldn't find it within myself. Please don't remember me for the leaving. Remember me for the moments I stayed, and the way I loved you quietly when words failed me." I read it twice, maybe 3 times, until the ink blurred through my tears. Every line felt like a gentle touch from a distance, one last connection that didn't need answers, just acceptance. When I looked up, Daniel was watching me, his expression soft, almost reverent. "He meant every word," he said quietly. I nodded, folding the letter carefully. "You know," I said, "I used to think closure meant forgetting. But now I see it's about understanding, about finally seeing the truth and still being able to love what was." Daniel gave a small, knowing smile. "He wants you to live freely now." "I think I finally can," I said. We sat for a while longer, talking about simpler things, the weather, old places, how time changes the way we see everything. It wasn't about him anymore, not really. It was about life, and the strange ways it heals itself when given honesty. When Daniel left that evening, the air outside was golden, the sun setting softly behind the trees. I watched him walk down the path, his figure blending with the light, and I realized that sometimes the people who return from our past aren't meant to stay. They come to deliver peace and help us move forward. That night, I placed the letter in a small box with a few other keepsakes, a photo, a ring, a pressed flower from a long-ago spring. I didn't close it with sadness this time, but with gratitude. Then I turned off the light, opened the window, and let the cool evening air fill the room. The silence that once felt unbearable now felt alive, almost kind, a reminder that some goodbyes, no matter how late they arrive, can finally teach the heart to be still.